Dear friends, in episode 5, we identified the meaning of the symbol beast as kingdom based on Daniel 7, where 4 beasts rise from the great sea. There we also described the composite identity of the dragon as the convergence of all the beasts of Daniel and his will to subdue humanity under a unified political order in place of the kingdom of Christ. Then, in episode 6, we identified the beast from the sea as the later continuation of Daniel's 4th beast, that is, the Roman imperial line in its Western historical development, with Germany as the 8th head, given authority over the saints for 1,260 prophetic years, beginning in 800 AD with the rise of the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. We now turn to the second beast of Revelation 13. After the first beast rises from the sea, John sees another beast rising from the earth. And that detail is crucial, for in Revelation, the sea and the earth do not represent the same symbolic realm. As we saw in episode 3 on symbolic geography, the earth represents the political space into which the word of God has spread, the covenant world, while the sea represents the nations outside that world. So, when Rome rises as the 4th of Daniel's beasts, it rises from the symbolic sea of that time, as the symbolic earth was then still the land of Israel. But at a later stage, the earth greatly expands, when Christianity becomes the dominant religion of the empire. And as the symbolic earth expands, the symbolic sea is pushed outward, toward the surrounding heathen nations. This brings us to the main thesis of the episode. If the beast from the sea represents a great power arising from outside the covenant world, then the beast from the earth represents a great power arising from within it. And since Daniel has already established that beasts are kingdoms, the beast from the earth, like its counterpart, should not be reduced to a vague religious idea or merely to one deceptive individual. Rather, we should expect a mighty kingdom, or perhaps a political religious power, emerging not from the nations, but from within the expanded world of Christianity itself. So, the question before us is no longer simply, who is the second beast? The real question is this: what great power arose from within the Christian political world, appeared closer to the realm of the Lamb, and yet continued to speak with the voice of the dragon? Let us now look more closely at the beast from the earth. John immediately marks an important difference. This beast has 2 horns like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. Its lamb-like appearance is not accidental. It rises within the Christian political world, in a realm that outwardly appears closer to the kingdom of Christ. In that sense, it resembles the lamb. But when it speaks, its true principle is revealed. For it seeks unity, not by the Spirit of God, but by coercive political power. The text says that it exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf. This means that it does not appear as an unrelated new power, but as a continuation of the same imperial principle in another form. When the old Western seat of Roman power is broken, the Roman imperial principle does not disappear. It continues from a new seat, in Christian form. So, the second beast does not begin as a non-Roman power. It begins as Christian Rome itself, exercising the authority of the first beast from within the expanded symbolic earth. And here another striking feature appears. The beast from the earth performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of men. This too is crucial. As we saw in the case of the 2 witnesses, fire from the symbolic heaven to the symbolic earth marks prophetic authority, proceeding from the realm of the faithful against the realm of unbelief and apostasy. So, when the earth beast displays the same kind of sign, it is not merely performing a wonder. It is imitating prophetic authority in order to deceive the inhabitants of the earth and to appear as a bearer of heavenly legitimacy. Then the earth beast sets up an image of the first beast, compelling all people to worship it. Here, the image should not be understood as a mere statue. It is the reproduced form of the first beast's imperial order. The same Roman pattern of public power is now given spirit, so that it may speak, command submission, and impose death on those who refuse. It appears that the earth beast uses 2 main strategies: deception, through the imitation of lamb-like and prophetic authority, and coercion, through the legislation and violence of the image of the first beast. Now on the mark of the beast. This too is not first of all technological or physical, but covenantal and spiritual. Here, Revelation deliberately recalls the language of Deuteronomy, where the people of God are commanded to bind his words on the hand and on the forehead. In other words, God's mark concerns both thought and action, both inward loyalty and outward obedience. The beast demands the same pattern for itself. Its mark is placed on forehead and hand because it seeks counterfeit covenant loyalty. It demands inward allegiance and outward compliance. My friends, do you see the parallels? And this is why the mark is linked to buying and selling. Submission to the beast becomes the condition for full participation in social and economic life. So, the mark is not merely an emblem. It is the beast's claim to govern conscience, conduct, and life itself. At this point, the real issue among Christians becomes visible. It is no longer only what men profess, for the vast majority are now Christians, but whether they will remain faithful to God under the danger of exclusion and death. This is a broader institutional test for the Christian world. The one who is victorious will inherit all this, but the cowardly will face the second death. The moral war described earlier in Revelation now appears in public, legal, and economic form. And this war runs through the whole narrative until the new creation. We may now summarize the historical meaning of these symbols. The beast from the earth arises within the Christian political world and is therefore best understood as the Christian empire after the Edict of Thessaloniki, when Christianity became the obligatory religion of the empire. Its lamb-like appearance reflects the Christian form of the empire, presenting itself as outwardly closer to the kingdom of Christ, while continuing to govern in the spirit of the dragon. Its exercise of the first beast's authority points to the continuation of Roman imperial power from Constantinople. Fire from heaven suggests the imitation of prophetic authority within the Christian world. The image of the first beast points to the reproduction of Roman imperial order in Christian form, and its mark on hand and forehead represents counterfeit covenant loyalty, imitating the sign of God. Historically, this pattern becomes visible when state-defined doctrine is made a condition of legal and economic existence. In that sense, the laws preserved in the Justinian Code provide a striking example. Those judged heretical were deprived of the right to buy, sell, inherit, or transfer property. But these laws are not God's laws, my friends. They are works of human hands, human ordinances, taking the place of obedience to God. Let us now turn briefly to the false prophet. At a later stage in Revelation, the same Eastern line of power appears under another title. It is no longer described simply as the beast from the earth, but as the false prophet. To understand this title correctly, we must first understand what Revelation means by the word prophet. John often defines things through repeated formulae. One part of a phrase remains fixed, while another part changes, and the changed element reveals the intended equivalence. In Revelation 19, the angel speaks of those who hold to the testimony of Jesus. In Revelation 22, the parallel wording speaks of the prophets and of those who keep the words of this scroll. This shows that, in Revelation, the true prophet is not a predictor, but one who bears the testimony of Jesus and keeps the words of this prophecy. By extension, the false prophet is not merely a vague spiritual fraud. It is a false religious authority, claiming sacred legitimacy, yet not bearing the testimony of Jesus. But the same method can also help us identify who the false prophet is within the narrative. In chapter 13, the beast from the earth cooperates with the beast from the sea. It performs signs in its presence, deceives the inhabitants of the earth, and directs them toward the image of the first beast. In chapter 19, the same pattern appears again. The beast is judged together with the false prophet, who had performed signs on its behalf, and deceived those who received its mark. So here again, by comparison of repeated formulae, Revelation identifies the same line under a later title. The point is not merely that both figures are similar. The point is that the beast from the earth later appears as the false prophet. We may now turn from textual identification to historical interpretation. If the beast from the earth later appears under the title of the false prophet, then the question becomes, how does this Eastern line develop in history? The line proposed here is this. First, Christian Rome in the East, centered in Constantinople. Then, the same Eastern imperial power under judgment and decline. And finally, the mature Eastern politico-religious form of apostasy. In this model, that final form appears in Islamic Caliphate, not merely as another kingdom among kingdoms, but as the mature Eastern counterpart in opposition to the testimony of Jesus. Only at this later stage do the two horns receive their fuller significance. They are best understood, not as the historic churches themselves, for those belong to the true Lamb, but as later spiritual formations belonging to the mature form of the false prophet. My friends, with this proposed historical identification of the beast from the earth, we have now reached the end of the first cycle of this series. The purpose of this first cycle was to describe the setting in which the prophetic drama unfolds, and to provide basic orientation regarding the principal hostile powers that oppose God's plan to unite humanity under the kingdom of Christ. If you wish to go deeper into a structured, text-based analysis of these matters, I invite you to examine the evidence for yourself in my free electronic book, An Intelligence Analyst Studies the Book of Revelation, linked in the description of this video. In Cycle 2, we will begin to examine the covenantal side of this drama, and in the next episode, the woman in heaven in Revelation 12. Until then, I wish you health, peace, and every blessing.